This is Baltic MR Roulette and is their newest collection of dress watches. In today's video, I will do a full review of this watch, point out all the positives and the negatives as I find them. This watch has a diameter of 36mm, it's 44mm from one lug to another, the lug opening is 20mm, and it's about 10mm in case height including this domed crystal. Without the crystal, it's about 8mm. The case is made out of 316L stainless steel and it features both satin and high polish finishes. The sides of the case, the top of the lugs, and this bezel are all executed with the satin finish, and I think they did a good job with this finish. There are a few high polish highlights, such as the crown, the sides of the bezel, as well as the case back, and I really like this alternation. I think it gives this case a lot more visual interest. If it was just all high polish or all satin finish, I don't think we would get the same effect. I also like the fact that they went with a satin finish on the bezel. I know some people might disagree. I think it's more traditional to have a high polish finish on the bezel of dress watches, but I think this choice of finishing makes the watch feel like a good combination between a vintage and a modern timepiece. The crown is located at the 3 o'clock position. It's a push-pull style crown. It's not a screw-down crown. The watch doesn't have too much water resistance, only 30 meters. This crown is also not signed. I think Baltic deliberately chose not to sign the crown to kind of keep up with this sort of vintage inspired design. The other part that is very vintage inspired is actually this crystal. It's not sapphire, it is Hasselite. It's a boxed and domed Hasselite crystal, which gives this watch a more warm appearance. Now, some people might not like that step because of course sapphire is more durable, but I don't mind it. I think it gives this watch a certain level of charm. The crystal at the back, because this watch does feature a display case back, is also, from my understanding, Hasselite. I couldn't find too much information about this crystal. Everywhere it says just Hasselite, so I'm just gonna assume it's not sapphire, it's Hasselite as well. Now this case back is not a screw down case back, it's held together with screws, which is again fine. This is a dress watch with only 30 meters of water resistance. Other than the crystal and the unsigned crown, the other part of the watch that makes it feel more vintage inspired are these drilled lug holes. I really like watches that feature drilled lug holes, and admittedly it doesn't work on all watches, but I think it works pretty well on this watch, so I'm glad they took that step because it makes changing the strap for something else much easier. If I had one complaint about the case of this watch, it's the heft of it. I know I can't really translate it over video, but I wish the watch just felt a little bit heftier. I understand it's a smaller dress piece, so it can't feel very hefty, and I guess it's just a personal preference, but I feel like this watch is very light and I wish it had a little bit more to it. I guess it's light because, first of all, it's a smaller watch, but secondly, because it features those Hasselite crystals instead of a sapphire sandwich, which would make it feel a little bit more hefty. As far as I'm concerned, the star of the show is the dial. I really like how this dial looks. Of course, it has that roulette design, that's why the name MR Roulette. And no, it's not a James Bond villain, although it kind of sounds like one, doesn't it? The dial overall features a grainy finish, which is very cool because it has this applied roulette wheel, which is also finished with the grainy finish, but unlike the center of the dial, it has a sunburst effect, as opposed to the plain matte finish on the center of the dial. So it kind of plays with the light in a very interesting way. I'll do my best to demonstrate it over video, but in person it does look very cool. It gives this sort of layered look to otherwise a pretty thin watch. I think Baltic did a really good job with the design of this dial. Now, this is not a completely original design. This Baltic pays a pretty strong homage to a vintage Patek Philippe Calatrava roulette dial. You can see quite a few similarities between the two models, but of course this Baltic also features a sub-seconds hand at the 7 o'clock position as opposed to the Patek. And I really like this step. It kind of became a bit of a calling card of Baltic dress watches. If you remember a few other dress models from Baltic, they all featured this design, the sub-seconds at the 7. Now the sub-seconds at the 7 is also finished with a slightly different finish. It has concentric circles as opposed to the grainy finish, and once again it plays with the light in a very interesting manner. The set of hands are finished with a high polish, and it's a Dauphine style set of hands. I think the overall execution on the dial is fantastic. As I said, a lot of times making dials like this, especially in smaller watches, could make the watch feel overly busy, but I think over here it's pretty well balanced. The swatch by default comes on this Italian leather strap. I like the tan leather look. I think it looks really good in combination with this blue dial. It also features a white stitching, which again looks pretty attractive. It's a pretty soft and simple strap. It doesn't really take much wearing in. Some leather straps you really have to wear over time to conform to your wrist. This one here, right off the bat, you put it on and it's fairly comfortable. It features a simple tank buckle with a Baltic logo. There's also a couple of loops to hide the access strap, and there is a Baltic logo on the strap itself. One of my favorite features of the strap are the quick release pins. I always appreciate companies including these because it just makes it so much easier to swap the strap for something else, and also having these drilled lug holes is just an added bonus. So even if you put a strap on this watch that doesn't have quick release pins, it is still pretty easy to swap it out. On the wrist, the watch is very comfortable. Here it is on my 7¼ inch wrist. For my size of wrist, it might be slightly undersized. It is sort of vintage inspired dress watch, so I guess it's supposed to be smaller. If it were up to me, I'd probably enlarge this case slightly, make it maybe 38mm. It would fit my wrist maybe a little bit better. It would look more proportionate. As it is right now, it's very comfortable. It looks great. I actually wore this watch quite a bit before this review. I really like how it looks on my wrist. Again, I wish it was maybe a little bit larger, but other than that, it's super comfortable, very light, very thin. The crown is close to the case, so it doesn't really dig into your wrist. There are no awkward pressure angles. This is kind of that great dress watch feel. I think if you have a wrist larger than mine, this watch might be too small for you. If you have a wrist like mine or smaller, I think the watch would look pretty good on your wrist. This one is powered by the Hangzhou Caliber 5000A movement. It's an automatic ultra thin movement with a micro rotor. From the name, I think you already gathered that this is a Chinese movement. Some people will care about that fact, some people won't. To me personally, it doesn't matter as long as the movement is good. And from the feedback on the internet, it's okay. It's not the best movement, it's not the worst, but it does of course feature that micro rotor, which Baltic really wanted to include in a watch like this. I guess the alternative to something like this would be ETA 7001. That would be the Swiss-made movement, but of course that one is only hand-wound. It's not automatic. It doesn't have the micro rotor. It doesn't have all these decorations. So I'm glad that they went for something a little bit different, a little bit more unique, if you will. The other specs of this movement, it has 30 joules. It beats at 28,800 vibrations per hour, and it has about 42 hours of power reserve. According to Baltic and the writing on the back of this movement, it looks like the movement has been tested in 5 different positions and has been adjusted for accuracy, which is good to see. Now, some of the positives and negatives of the movement. The positives, first of all, it's very beautiful. Of course, having a micro rotor in this price point is amazing. I also like all the decorations, the blue screws, the striping, the whole 9 yards. All of that looks very attractive. I also like the fact that the movement fills out the whole of the case. A lot of times with these display case bags, the movement is just a portion of the case and the rest of it has to be covered up. Here it looks very beautiful. It's all on display for you because the movement is wide enough. So I think that looks really good. Now, as far as the negatives, it is a bit loud, so you can hear the rotor spinning. It's not the most refined feeling rotor. So I guess that's the only negative. And of course, it is a Chinese movement if you care about that sort of thing. I think it's a pretty good watch. I think Baltic did a great job with this design. Now, of course, the design is very subjective. Some people will like it, some people not so much. I happen to like it. I think it's a busy dial, but not overly busy. It just overall is a very interesting dress watch. As far as the price goes, €545. It's similar price in US dollars. I think it's okay. I mean, yeah, you can probably get a cheaper watch with similar specs, but Baltic has overall a pretty good reputation, and I think now they're kind of stepping out of that micro brand zone and they're becoming more of an established brand, and I think you have to pay a little bit more for that. If you buy this watch, I don't see you being disappointed. As I pointed out, it has some negatives, it has some positives. So overall, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Also give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Hello, Mr. Roulette. I have been expecting you. The name is Bond. Mr. Bond. I have license to bark.